not only do we have greed in terms of money and so on, but we also have a time when people are being treated not as human beings, but as rejects because either there's color or their origin. This is not something that I felt when I first came to this country, but I'm feeling it more and more now. But on the other hand, there's a tremendous passion and a tremendous willingness to work together to stand on our feet and defeat this attempt to denigrate us.
Yeah, I'm the voice of Audacity.
I am the voice of Audacity.
I am the voice of Audacity.
Local voices, real impact, right now. Audacity, creative action together.
Andrew Stanchoff, thank you for joining me. You live on Spruce Head Island. You are 89 years old. You just had 2 letters published in the paper. You've got chickens you're running after. You've got a big garden. You've also lived a life that's given you a unique perspective on current events. So why do you find the time to spend Saturday mornings protesting in Rockland?
Today we are in a really, really difficult situation politically, morally. I think that there's an interest by a certain group of people to take the people that make up the country into a very, very dark place, which we have seen happen over 100 years, and I'm familiar with because I was born in Bulgaria and we saw fascism. So I think that's what is happening right now. We're in a state of national decadence, and it's, to me, ironic that we're celebrating 250 years of our existence at a time when our existence is really in danger.
You've always been involved in protests and demonstrations.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking a lot about the reflecting pool in Washington, and I remember being there for the Martin Luther King speech at the Lincoln Memorial, and the crowd was so huge that I got shoved sideways. I didn't fall into the reflecting pool, but one of my feet went down into it. And I also was very much a participant in local politics, where I fought against what I consider to be greedy and immoral behavior by developers who came into Frederick County, Maryland. These developers would come in and they would bribe the county commissioners in a very simple way. Because I remember one of the county commissioners coming to me and saying, "Hey, Andy, why are you fighting this?" And I said, "Well, because I don't think that they're being fair." He said, "But they're being fair to me. They promised me a house if I vote to have this development happen." And it was so extraordinary to hear somebody who was actually pleased and accepting a bribe.
He was before his time, huh?
What's different now is we have hundreds of people who are trying to do it, and those people are supporting a president who is doing it like nobody's ever done it before. As we know, he's already made about $2 billion in the last 8-10 months. But we also have a time when people are being treated not as human beings, but as rejects because either there's color or their origin. And this is not something that I felt when I first came to this country, but I'm feeling it more and more now.
I know that you were born in Bulgaria and your whole family were immigrants.
Yeah, I don't recall very much before I was 5, but when I was 5 years old, the American and British Air Force bombed Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, and we were all forced to sleep in a very narrow corridor. And bombs were falling all around. And my father decided it was time for us to go. And so we started out by going to Romania in a place called Bessarabia, which is now called Moldova. And he had a very difficult time there because he was hated by both the Germans and by the Soviets. And we saw him on Easter that year, 1943. And then we went to Switzerland, my mother and 7 brothers and sisters. And I have some memories of being in a train and crossing through Austria. There were parachutes floating down on both sides of the railway, and the railway kept jerking to stops. And of course, the 5.5-year-old remembers things like parachutes. We did make it to the Swiss border, and my mother was taken out of the train and taken to the German officer in charge, and we were petrified that she was going to be arrested or something. And finally she came out, and both she and the German officer were in tears. And it turned out that the German officer was from the old guard and totally hated Hitler. And he and my mother had a long chat about how things had been before. The next part of the journey was across France, which had been destroyed. The northern part of France had been destroyed by the Nazis and bombing by the Allies. And you saw thousands of people just wandering kind of aimlessly in the streets and in all this debris. Anyway, we got on a ship, and it was called the United States, and it was a troop ship. It had been redesigned, and my mother and the kids were put in one cabin, and my father, who had joined us by this time, and my brother were on deck in hammocks along with all the returning American soldiers. The most astonishing thing about that trip was that the food that we saw. I had never seen so much food in my life. During our time in Switzerland, everything had been, maybe 3 eggs a month for 7 people and things like that. And I remember watching from the railing of the ship all the stuff trailing behind the ship, oranges and apples and bread and all this food. And it just struck me as the most amazing.
So do you feel like, excuse me, but I'm just wondering, do you feel like your experiences as a small child that you're describing now, seeing war, the effects of war, does that have anything to do with your joining the protests and maybe in your history of political activism in this country?
Throughout this whole business of bombings and moving and not getting enough food and not seeing my father, I saw the injustice of it all. And you begin to wonder why. And when we moved to Maryland, it became even more apparent because Maryland was below the Mason-Dixon line, and every theater and every store had a fountain for Black people and a fountain for white people. And the movies had sections. Every year we had George Wallace come up with his people, not the Ku Klux Klan, but the closest thing to it, and they would create havoc. So all these injustices became even more apparent.
Another interesting thing I think you bring to the gatherings on Saturday is your profession of geology. And being a geologist, you sort of like see the big picture of the earth. And I know that you've been a long-time climate activist.
What we're doing is we're up against a group of people who think that the earth is here for us to despoil it. There's a kind of a colonialist attitude that goes back to the 16th century when people just went all over the world and took over whatever they wanted. stole whatever they wanted and developed whatever they wanted. But what we've not understood is that we are cutting off our nose to spite our face. One of the things I'm working on is there is a potential for a mine in Warren, and a Canadian company came and tried to develop it, but people fought it. Now, fortunately, the mine is not going through, but that doesn't mean that we're really making progress in protecting our environment. The rape of the earth that is diminishing not only our own existence, but the existence of our children.
One thing I wanted to ask you to say a bit about was your petitioning to the king, to King Trump, a la the King George.
You mean the advertisement that I put out in the local newspaper with friends?
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about? Well,
yes.
what we did there, I belonged to a book group, and in the 250th year of our independence, what are we going to do? So we started reading Jefferson and Adams, and suddenly I got to the Declaration of Independence, and I realized I had never read the grievances that the colonists had against George III. So I read the grievances and I said, oh my God, George III was a Girl Scout compared to Trump. Trump has committed so many more foul, disgusting acts. We, as a country, exist only because a bunch of guys thought that George III was doing terrible things. Well, he was, but nothing compared to what Trump is doing.
Thank you for saying that and saying it so eloquently and putting it in front of the whole community in the papers. What do you feel like is the highest priority right now that needs to be addressed? Like, what is the biggest problem we have right now?
The biggest problem we have right now is the fascist grifting organization that we have that is known as the Republican Party. Most of the Republican Party has taken over the positions of the 19th and early 20th century Democrats, which is a racist sort of approach to the world. It's Mexicans or Haitians. It's any foreign element in this country is now being treated as second-rate humanity. In other words, it's not only the race that you're opposed to, you're opposed to people joining you in the search for a better life. Those people are excluded. Therefore, you can become richer and do it faster on the back of the other one. And that is the direction that we're going in. In the case of Maine, there are people who don't understand that the senators and Congress people that we have are not doing their job. The job itself of being a senator, it's not going out to every firehouse in Maine and getting a few $100s for the new truck. It is not about bribing local communities. No, we have to turn things around, and it may mean some suffering. It may mean a few brand new fire engines, and I'm picking on the fire department, but that's one of the places that our Senator Susan Collins has been playing a game of bribery, and therefore continuing to go back to Washington to vote against the will of the people. In a larger sense.
What do you feel like the outcome is of all these people getting together on Saturdays? Do you feel like it's going to be influential on policy, or do you feel like it's mostly just cultivating community, which in itself is laudable, but not necessarily productive in the larger sense? How do you feel about it?
When you go to the march in Rockland, it's really sort of elevating. It elevates the spirit, but it's also kind of depressing at times because I think this is such a tiny thing. But then one realizes that there was a similar group of people meeting in Belfast or in Union, and this amalgamation of all of these groups throughout the country may, and I pray it will, in the long run, change the process. And we can see that that's beginning to happen.
So you feel like we're starting to go in the right direction?
The other day I met a guy and his wife, and they were just as fanatical about supporting people who were in poverty and helping people who are suffering under the conditions that Trump is imposing on us. And I asked them what they did. The husband was a carpenter and she was a teacher. Well, to me, that's an inspiration. And in a sense, from the way they responded, I was an inspiration to them. So I think that's important, and I hope that we're going to change things by doing that.
Amen. Well, do you care to comment on what you think either of your parents or both of your parents would think of what's happening in the U.S. today?
Like most people, wish that I had a chance to talk to my parents about a lot of things because I would have learned a lot more. But I was very fortunate because my father was very direct and very blunt about the inequities that exist in this country. And my mother was very, not only direct, but she wrote articles for Commonweal, which is a great magazine, to describe not only what was wrong, but what needed to be done. And they'd be talking about it in the context of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Those documents are part of the Enlightenment history. And what we're doing today is we're moving away from enlightenment. We're going into darkness. And my parents would be telling us that.
Well, we should be listening. Thank you very much for your time, and keep up the good work. I mean, keep those cards and letters coming to the Midcoast Villager and elsewhere. And keep coming Saturdays, will ya?
Thank you, Cynthia.
If you're interested in learning more about Audacity, you can find us at www.AudacityCAT.com. We can also be found at Blue Sky, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you for listening.
The Voices of Audacity podcast joins with other AudacityCAT efforts to share information, promote political action, and enable discussion among local citizens. Although we hold different views on specific issues, we agree on 7 core values. We oppose authoritarianism, bigotry, and corruption. We support inclusive democracy, equity, and freedom. And we are committed to nonviolence in all actions. Any individual opinions expressed in these conversations reflect the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect the stance of Audacity as a group.